Hi friends, thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm so excited to get to introduce you all to Dr. Mark Allen today. He's one of the founders of Cognitive FX and is a brilliant researcher and scientist and also just a really good guy. I will read you more of his bio and hope to be able to get through this without stumbling over all the big words. So, Mark Allen earned a PhD in cognitive science at Johns Hopkins University with postdoctoral training in cognitive neuroscience and functional neuroimaging at the University of Washington. As a co-founder, Dr. Allen developed the scientific foundation and technological innovations that make treatment at Cognitive FX unique and exceptional. Dr. Allen is a pioneer in the development of fMRI for use in clinical settings. Significant scientific contributions include the development of neuroimaging biomarkers for post-concussion diagnosis and treatment, and theoretical work in the pathophysiology of chronic post-concussion symptoms. Specifically, his research led to the discovery of the key role of neurovascular coupling dysfunction in post-concussion syndrome. Significant clinical contributions include fMRI patient assessment based on individual neuroanatomy analysis. He has performed over 10,000 such assessments to date. Additional clinical contributions include the development of a unique high-intensity interval training protocol of cardiovascular exercise that targets restoration of neuronal function and cerebrovascular responsivity. Most recently, Dr. Allen has co-engineered a machine learning-based program for functional neuroanatomical discovery and highly advanced fMRI analysis techniques, which provide a more reliable and standardized method of fMRI analysis on concussion patients. Mark, I'm so excited for this chance to pick your brain and to have you share your brilliance with us today. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah. And let's jump right in. So can you tell us a little bit more about your backstory, what brought you to this point in your career, and how did you and Dr. Fong decide to get into helping people heal from concussions?
Well, yeah, I got into functional MRI kind of early on. And, back in the late 90s, because where I was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins, they decided to, get going on that early on and got one of their MRI machines outfitted to do functional MRI. And that brings us right to the present, because having to understand how functional MRI works actually was a big head start in understanding post-concussion syndrome, because a lot of the physiology behind fMRI is also the physiology that gets compromised in post-concussion syndrome. And so that kind of just closes that circle over 2 decades or more of time. So fast forward from all that, I end up with Alina Fong as my first graduate student. That was at BYU, where I served time. That was hard time. I think I did a dime there. I understand that means 10 years in prison speak. That's the only prison lingo I know. So anyway.
It's impressive. Good job.
Yeah. So she was interested in concussion. And one of my colleagues there, Aaron Bigler, was big in concussion. And so I kind of got into it too. And then Alina went off after she graduated, she became a clinical neuropsychologist and started treating concussion. So I got more interested in it. And then we also launched a company that just provided the functional imaging to hospitals. And we found that it was mainly concussion patients that were being scanned. That was the main use for it, because it's well suited for it. It's good at picking up dysfunction when regular MRI scans show your brain as being normal. And there's a reason for that, because in post-concussion syndrome, we can get to this later, brain cells stay alive, but they become dysfunctional. And so because they stay alive, they don't die off, and you don't have big areas of the brain where there's atrophy that you can notice. So it is kind of a mystery. Well, it was for a lot of people why it would be that way, that the brain would look normal but not be performing normal. Anyway, so back to the timeline. She was treating a lot of people too with concussion and post-concussion syndrome. So we have both the fMRI being used for that and her gaining a lot of experience in how to treat it effectively. Problem was that she wasn't able to treat it effectively in the way that she wanted to. So she saw a way that would really work, that would be effective. And so I asked her, why don't you do that? And what is it? Why don't you do it? Mm-hmm. Well, it was a problem with the institutions of hospitals and clinics and insurance, especially, that wouldn't allow to do what would actually work. And so I said, well, what is it? Well, wouldn't be cost effective, couldn't do it. There wouldn't be, but what is it? And then she kind of laid out this thing that would become what we do at Cognitive FX. And we just, figured out a way to make it work. We got lucky with some contacts in the NFL where it allowed us to try it out in an environment where people were willing to, do things that aren't, that are outside of the norm, that are outside of standard treatment protocols, and people that are just interested in getting better, and they have some means to do it. And so that allowed us to work out some of the bugs, and then try to make it as cost effective as possible. And then eventually that led us to the clinic here in Provo, where there was an opportunity because of the facility that was there that we could do this. And so that's kind of it, backstory of how it all came together. And I can fill in a lot of the details that, have to do with the treatment and have to do with, the journey that's still going on. And that journey is to get better and better at it. I'm going to say this. I say this a lot, so I'll say it now, that we absolutely have to understand the physiology of what's going on. So every therapist who's treating post-concussion syndrome needs to see in their minds what they're actually doing down at what I call the level of mechanism. So this was a big deal at Johns Hopkins. You have to explain things down to the level of mechanism. You can't just say things like, well, we engage neuroplasticity, or we change pathways, or, the brain has to, I don't know, whatever, things like that. Those don't explain it. It's when you're talking about, okay, so neurons will use this neurotransmitter, or they will switch, where this kind of capillary has these kinds of cells and these respond this way to injury. And then this is what happens when you re-engage the neuron. It fires in this way and it begins to re-engage, rebuild those, endothelial cells, whatever, down. So in other words, down to the level of mechanism. So therapists need to see in their mind's eye what's going on at the physiological level in order to be effective at it. So it's been since, I'd say I started this in earnest in about 2015. And it started because I got embarrassed at a conference I was at where somebody asked me, well, Epic treatment was working. We knew it, Lena thought it would work, and it did work, and it worked amazingly. We saw the results on the scans, but we didn't know why exactly it worked. And so I had all kinds of what we call hand waving explanations. And one of them was really dumb, and I was embarrassed by it because it didn't work physiologically. And I knew it when I said it. But then I thought, okay, that's never going to happen again. I'm going to always know why it works, not just that it works. Can't be. And then that will help improve and it has. So the more we've known, the more that I've discovered about the physiology, the more it's helped. And no one is really out there doing that so much, or was at the time, and very few still are. So, right, that's been what I've mainly been up to all this time, is getting a better and better understanding of what it is we need, what's broken, what it is that we need to fix, and what would be the most effective way to fix it. And then being able to assess that, so that the functional scan helps a lot to see that physiology, but it mainly shows you where things are happening. What you need to know is why those things are happening at those locations. Mm-hmm. So, I have a lot to say about that, but I've kind of run this stream of thought to its end. So stop there.
I love it. No, you brought up a lot of things that I want to dig into some more, but I'm curious. So did you say 2015 is when you started this in earnest? When did you guys start doing CFX stuff?
Right. So we started doing the treatment, I'm going to say 2011, 12, 20, around there. We started with elite athletes, and one of our very first patients that we experimented on was a guy named Mike Nelson, who still works for us. But yeah, and then Cognitive FX, the clinic started in the fall of 14. So that's been 9 years now.
Wow.
And we had another clinic in Boston, TB12, that where we were working with Tom Brady, and that's where we got a lot of the ability to experiment around and try it out. Mm-hmm. Our very first patient there, it worked wonderfully. And then the second one, and the third one, the fourth one. And then we're talking about not athletes anymore, but actual patients who come in because they've been in, had injury from either sports or car accidents or whatever. Mm-hmm. Then it just kept working. Soon we got more patients that weren't the typical concussion, that they had more unusual symptoms. And that's where we needed to up the game, get better at taking care of some of those symptoms that aren't the most common or that are the hardest to treat.
Yeah, there's a lot. It just seems like what we do at CFX could be beneficial for so many different populations. And it's so effective for PCS, for post-concussion syndrome. But it's been really helpful for people with other things too.
Well, that's true, because everything we do is actually good just for overall brain health anyway. So that's a demographic of patient that we thought a lot about is, let's say, somebody about my age and, getting on the dark side of the 50s and you're in a high pressure career where you have to think a lot and you're competing with younger people, and, your brain just naturally declines in its ability. And so EPIC treatment is absolutely something that could sharpen up a brain like mine. It doesn't have to be PCS damage, but we kind of prioritize to get to people who are suffering. And, there's a limited amount of space that we have. And so, I know that there are people suffering out there. And this is another thing that, I'm going to plug CFX in this, and I'm going to do it shamelessly because it's a noble thing to do.
I agree.
Yeah. It's expensive, but it's not expensive for what it is. If you consider how many very expensive therapists you're getting packed into 2 weeks time or 1 week time, you're getting like 60 sessions with expensive, things like occupational therapists, like this person interviewing me, anyway, but but I understand that. I grew up poor. I know what a sacrifice it is to do this. But what's bothersome to me is that there are so many people out there, and people who basically have the means to do this. I mean, it's doable. It's not completely out of reach for the average person, but they don't know about it, or they know about it and they've been told by somebody that it's a scam, or they don't trust it because there's so many other voices out there, so many that are actual scams, or that are, that don't really care and they take your money and they do, basic things. And there are copycats of us now. This wasn't a problem before, but there are clinics popping up, especially in the Netherlands, but here locally too, and throughout the US, that have copied some of the formula, but they don't really invest what it takes. It's really hard to get somebody better. It takes a whole team of everybody really focused on that patient, really using all of their best skills, working together, and it can be done. It takes a lot of work, but these other clinics aren't willing to put in that work. That's not the way their structure is, so they cut corners. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is that for either the reason of having gone to one of those places and being soured by it, or that, seeing that we're out there, but thinking it's just another one of these places, or having a neurologist or somebody tell them that it's a scam because they don't know anything about it. So the easiest thing to say is, well, that's just a scam if you don't know anything about it, right? And it breaks my heart really that there are all these people out there, they don't know that they could be better. And then you have the people who do come and and they overwhelmingly say, I'm so glad I did this. It was so worth it. It changed my life. Overwhelmingly. Yep. I mean, very, very few are, almost nobody is angry after. Everybody says it's worth it, and very few say I got minimal help. Most say I got tons of help, and I feel back to myself. So that's the thing that's frustrating for me right now, is trying to get above the noise and show the legitimacy and have people trust it. And one of the best ways is if it's past patients that are out there, saying this was so amazing, telling their friends and family.
Yeah, it's true. And I can understand why people sometimes are skeptical, because they'll look at all of the testimonials and stuff and be like, this seems too good to be true. But I tell people all the time, I pinch myself every week, like, is this real life? And it is. Like, that's the thing. I've worked there since, I guess, 3 years after you guys officially started. I started in 2017. And that was like, I love it. It is amazing. I
think I know why it sounds too good to be true. Because it turns out that, post-concussion syndrome is a really interesting thing, because what you have are healthy brain cells that are there that could be doing their job, but they're not. What we understand now is that they were dormant for a bit while they were repairing, so they get kicked out of the network that they used to be in, that used to be engaged in. And so then they're not in that network anymore. And so they're not firing. And so they're not firing and not signaling that they're good to go to be in that network. So somehow you've got to break that cycle. So that seems to be what's happening. And that solves the mystery of how it is that you could have something that's healthy but not working, and why that could go on indefinitely. See, this is why a lot of practitioners didn't believe in post-concussion syndrome. And now they are more and more. Why a lot of scientists didn't understand, because it's not like anything else in the body. This is a strange thing to have something that there can be an injury, a time of injury, and then something happens and you have these symptoms and they stay and they don't necessarily get worse. See, if it got worse over time, what happens is it would spiral down, the brain would shut down, you'd go into a coma and die. That's what typically happens when things get worse. So why would you have a brain that you scan and it looks healthy using standard scanning? Why would people have these terrible symptoms, but that you could explain, through psychological or whatever, it's neck pain or, all these other explanations? Well, why would it be something that would be damaged, so to speak, about the brain? Is we think about more as dysfunctional, but there is some damage to the cells that doesn't kill the cell. It's just more in the peripheral operations of the cell. Why would that just stay like that indefinitely? It would either get worse or get better. It doesn't get better. That's the thing that's really was mysterious about it. It should do one or the other, go one or the other. So that's why it didn't seem like there was a physiological explanation, because that's not how physiology is most of the time. Well, it turns out that it's exactly how it is in the brain, and the explanation is in neuroplasticity and networks. So there's a plasticity that's engaged at the time of injury to reorganize the networks, because the preferred brain cell isn't available to do its job, this little processor that does its job within the network. So it reorganizes into what we call a maladaptive network. And this is becoming a lot more accepted now, this idea. And then it when you can get some, you sit in front of a talented occupational therapy like Bethany Lewis, and she gets a little spark out of that brain cell, then it begins to send signals back to the network through these things called hybrid astrocytes that do that. They're these smart little helper cells that do computations that keep the networks functioning as they should. Then those things can get that brain cell back into its network, and then you get back to normal. So that's why I've forgotten the original question, but this is the answer to it. And so if you can remind me what the original question is, I'll tell you why this is the answer to it.
You were saying this is why it seems too good to be true.
Exactly. Because it's totally fixable. So the success rate is very high that we have, right? And that's not the case with most rehabilitative medicine. The success rates aren't this high anywhere in medicine, right? But because it's set up to be fixed, in a sense. So it's kind of it's an easy fix, I say, in that it at the end of the day, there is a path toward total recovery. It's hard to do because it takes a lot of effort on the patient's part and a lot of effort on the therapist's part working with that patient, and a lot of skill, and you have to do it just right. And if you don't do it just right, it doesn't work. But if you do it just right, then it does. And so, sometimes I actually play down the success rate, like at conferences, scientific conferences and things, because I don't have time to explain why. So instead of saying 99%, I'll say it's 80% successful. And that's huge in medicine. Wow, 80%. Good job, guys. And it's believable, but 99 isn't. But then if you sit down and really get into it, everybody says, okay, I see why that would work, right? These brain cells are healthy. Obviously, they're there and they're ready to go. So there's no reason you shouldn't be able to fix this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's something to do with the intensity and putting it all in 1 to 2 weeks that makes a difference too. Can you explain why is that more beneficial than going to one session once a week or whatever?
So there are two parts to that. There's the coordinated effort. Okay. So one is that when people go off, I get a lot of consults with patients who are thinking about coming, and they said, well, I've already done vision therapy. I've done some balance work. I've gone to this place. I've done some OT. I've done some speech language therapy and physical therapy. Problem is when you do them in isolation, you actually can undo progress in one area. So if you do work on visual processing and you don't look at auditory processing at the same time, you don't look at balance and you don't take into account how that's changing the visual processing, basically you have to do them parallel and incremental. So that's the multidisciplinary part of it. So you do a little bit here, like in vision, let's say, and then you see how it's affecting balance, and you check with the therapist who's working on balance. So everybody's got to be communicating. They look at balance and do little adjustments there, and then then the person working on vision, it might even be the same person, might not. They see how that then affects the visual processing and then the cognitive stuff, like, okay, how's this affecting, memory formation and attention and so on? How's it affecting cervical stability or neck pain and so on? And you have to do a little bit here, a little bit there, not go all in one area and, potentially disrupt what's going on the other side. Okay. So there's that. But what you're talking about also is what we call the sustained principle. Mm-hmm. So we have EPIC treatment is image guided. It's multidisciplinary. It's cyclical. We can talk about the cycles, and then it's sustained. And you were talking about the sustained part. Okay. So this is the idea that, it's kind of like taking an antibiotic. If you're prescribed an antibiotic 3 times a day and you take it once every 3 days, it doesn't work because it has to build up. So there is some sort of build-up principle going on. And this is one of Alina's original insights, was that if you work at it for an hour and then send the person home and they come back later the next day or the next week, you lose all the gains from that original session, it seems. But if you keep at it over several hours, you build on those gains. And there is something about telling the brain that you're serious about what you're doing, that it makes those changes. Okay. And this is the last frontier of what I need to flesh out physiologically. You notice I used a really vague and kind of what we call hand wavy. I said, the brain has to take it seriously, and I didn't explain that in terms of physiology, and I need to. So that's something I'm working on. But it's still, it makes sense. Right when she said it way back 10 years ago, it made sense. Everybody you tell it to, it makes sense when you explain it, that you would have to do something like that to make the brain take it seriously. And people are like, yeah, that makes sense. Nobody's ever given pushback on that. Now, the only problem is you might run into, you're up against fatigue with the person. You can deal with that, help them through that. The other thing I was going to say about this sustain, I've forgotten. It was really important though. So I need to remember what it is about it. It's why so many other things don't work or work for a little. So, there are a lot of things out there that a supplement or a device or a trend, like let's say ice plunges, which, are wonderful. But a lot of people find that even the effect wears off. So some of the things people get excited about and they tell everybody, this is what you have to do. Well, first of all, oftentimes those things only work for a certain number of people with, a certain kind of, build of their body and mind and brain that makes it effective for them and not for everyone else. But the main thing that you find is that the effectiveness wears off. With a lot of tinnitus treatments are like this. People get really excited. Yes, it went away for 2 days, and then, oh man, it's coming back, and this thing I'm trying isn't working anymore. And so a lot of the bits that we do, if you just did those in isolation, you might get some success right away, and then it would wear off. So we get a lot of patients coming to us that have tried a lot of the very things we're doing, and they're like, yeah, it worked for a little while and then it wore off. So that's why I come back to this idea that the sustained part of it is something about the brain. I don't know why it wants to go back to the bad way of doing things when it can go, when it sees the light with the good way of doing things, but it does. And so, so there's something in that of doing these things and then just keeping at it, and not stopping until you get until you engage neuroplasticity to get that brain cell put back in the network it belongs in.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So thank you so much for everything that you've explained so far. And I think you've gone into this a little bit, but I want to just be a little bit more specific here with how do you explain to people what exactly a concussion is and what exactly post-concussion syndrome is?
Yeah, and that's very important. And that was something that frustrated me up until about a year ago, really, is there was a really good model for the acute condition of concussion. What happens at the time of concussion, the thing that lasts for an hour, a day or so. And there was a really great explanation in terms of the neurometabolic cascade and things that happen when the shearing action on the cytoskeletal structure, stuff that, is kind of susceptible to breakage, that, breaks down this, and the cell stays alive, but these things break down. Then they repair, the metabolic crisis ends, chemicals restore, everything gets back in balance in by a day or so, even, less than a day, according to that model. And then why do people persist with symptoms? Okay, but the symptoms actually change. They go from the acute to chronic. So why do 30% of people go on with lingering symptoms that now change and become the typical ones of post-concussion syndrome, like headache, brain fog, fatigue? Those are the big ones, inability to concentrate and so on. And there wasn't a good model for now that, I started developing a model of what the post-concussion state was and what that dysfunction was. What are the parts of the brain cell that are compromised? And one of them was, this signaling system that supplies the brain cell with blood, with fresh blood. It's a signaling system that causes the capillaries around the brain cell to dilate when it needs more oxygen and so on. We could talk about that again later, and some other things that explain the chronic state. But then what wasn't explained is how you get from the acute state to the chronic state. And you have to do that because it's confusing to patients what your patients ask about. It's you need to know what you're undoing. Okay, you've got to undo some process that brought you from the acute injury that we understand to the chronic one that we understand, but we don't know how the one got to the other, and that's what you're trying to undo. So you need to know what it is. So there are some big breakthroughs in understanding this. There's a group from Australia that took some of my theoretical work on that, and they did a much better job of fleshing that out in physiology. And the idea is that at the time of injury, you get some protective mechanisms that come in to save the brain cell. And then what can happen is that you can get into, again, a vicious circle where you're protecting the brain cell. So the brain cell's not firing. So then the brain cell's not firing. So it's giving off vibes that it's not well. So it keeps getting protected and so on and so on. So you got to break that cycle. So that was big. So that alone gets you to this acute to the chronic phase. The other really plausible route is the one that I talked about, where if a neuron is compromised by having some of its parts broken, parts of its axon, parts of that signaling system, there's a thing called astrocytic feet that get damaged. They attach to capillaries. They do some of that work. All these fragile things that break, that don't kill the cell, but take time to repair. So the other idea is that if these take too long to repair, the brain still has to work. The person has to do the things that they're doing. And so the networks reorganize. They get the next best players to participate if the preferred players are out of action. And so once the brain does that, though, then you can also get in that vicious cycle where you're not letting that brain, it's healed, it's ready to go. You're not letting it participate, though. And so how do you break that cycle? And that's where treatment comes in. It takes treatment of a special kind, focused kind, knowing what you're doing to break that cycle. And speaking of cycles, that's how we use cycles to do that. So this is what we call the PAR cycle, and it's prepare, activate, and rest. And so the preparation part is this, so we'll go from prepare to activate. That's where we do the work, is in the activate, the hard stuff. The prepare is that in rehabilitation, you have to push something harder than it's used to being pushed, or it wants to be pushed, or the person. So, you're going to do physical therapy for your knee. They're going to work you more than you want to work on your own, but they do it in a guided way. They know where and how to push, and how many reps you can do of this, and if it's helping or causing more damage. They know all that stuff, and we do too. We know that we need to push a brain cell, let's say. But the problem is that most people, you can force somebody to do leg exercises, but you can't force somebody to use their brain. They don't know what. You can voluntarily move your leg, but you don't know how to voluntarily make your brain work, and it's in no condition to work. So how do you even get it to where it'd be like if you had a cast on your leg? How do you work it? Well, you've got this kind of a cast going on around brain cells. So what we do is we create a condition where the brain is at its absolute optimal, and then you can get a little work out of it. And we do that by taking advantage of something called the post-exercise cognitive boost, PECB. And there are other methods that we use for prepare, and we're working on some really great ones. But currently, the big one involves some cardio exercise of a special kind that I developed to really, and that's one of its purposes, is to give you a maximal boost of those, what they're called neurotrophins. Neurotrophins are these interesting chemicals that are like fertilizer for the brain. They're not like neurotransmitters. For neurotransmitters, you have to be careful because you've got to get just the right balance. If you have, too much dopamine, then it compromises the way serotonin works and so on. You can't just put more of it in and it does better. But neurotrophins are different because you can't just put more of them in, and they do, and the brain gets better. So these neurotrophins are produced, there are all kinds of ways they're produced, but extreme, not to say extreme, but vigorous physical exercise produces BDNF is one of them. And there are two others that it also produces neurotrophins. Those are the big ones. So that's part of the prepare, but there's some other great benefits that come from cardio exercise. And there's a special way that I developed to do that, where you can get maximal benefit, not just for producing these chemicals for the prepare cycle, but also addressing autonomic disruption, which is very common in PCS. I can explain why that's very common, but we're talking about the PAR cycle. So that cardio, that's part of it, and we can circle back to the other benefits it has, but it has the benefit of producing those neurotrophins. That leads you into the activate cycle, where you try to put the most difficult things in the therapy at that spot. So that tends to be sitting down with either our, what we call cognitive therapists, who are speech language therapists, and they've created this whole field for themselves, which is, treating people with concussion, with cognitive deficits and post-concussion syndrome, or what we call neuro-occupational therapists. They've also retrained to do this specialty work. And, a couple of the other therapies that are the most difficult. Do that during that window that those neurotrophins are hanging around. And also there's some other chemicals like dopamine and endorphins that are released so that subjectively the patient tends to feel at their best also during that time. Headaches tend to be a little lower during that time, and so on, if you do it right. And then rest. So after that, there's a rest session that we get creative about trying to get some other benefits during that time. But if nothing else, it's supposed to be relaxing and kind of enjoyable for the patient to just, do something to unwind and to feel good before going back to work. And then I just repeat that for 8 hours.
Over and over
the
again.
Next day and the next day.
Yeah, it is so cool. And I love watching, seeing patients. For a while, I was seeing patients twice a week, and I would see them like on Tuesday and then Thursday. It was so cool to see how the week goes. And even now you get to hear like it's definitely a roller coaster of an experience for people, but it works. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. I love seeing that difference too. The Monday look when people first come in and you see that in their eyes, you can see the suffering and just the misery and the crankiness and the skepticism. And then, at the end of the week, you see them on like a Friday and they just look like a different person. And sometimes they don't realize it until people point it out to them. The family members maybe haven't seen them the whole week. And they're like, wow, that's my husband back. There he is. There, that light is back, behind their eyes. And it is really, really gratifying. And then the gratitude that they express, it can be overwhelming. I feed on it. I need it, to keep going. I need constant validation because this is a novel area. Get so much criticism for it, so much skepticism that Aline and we just need that validation constantly. So when they give us these big hugs and cry, and thank yous and send us notes and things like that, we just suck it up, because that's what keeps us going. Yeah. So it's very satisfying work to do.
It is. I especially as an OT, I just love a lot of the other settings that I've worked in. It's very, very slow progress, if at all. You have to try to eke out like justification of continuing treatment because maybe like they are making progress. Really, I promise. But this is like you get to be part of this team, and bam, these people are so much better.
You get to see fast results. Yeah. So you're working with it. You're an OT. Most of your training is with very impaired people, and then you're doing what your job title says is helping them live. How can they live, do what they need to do, the skills and and with this, it's really different. It's fast and it's intense and you get to do something different.
Yeah. And it is very gratifying. I agree. It's really, I love it. I'm really grateful that you guys have made this thing a thing. So I want to ask about the dysautonomia piece. So a lot of our patients come in suffering from this. You mentioned it. And they'll say things like, I was sitting on the couch and then not doing anything, nothing changed in my environment. And all of a sudden I'm sweating like crazy, or I'm working on something and all of a sudden my heart rate will spike for no reason.
Yeah.
So can you explain what dysautonomia is and why it's so common for people with PCS to experience?
Yeah. And not only with PCS, but for people in general. So the basis of this is that, so you have the two sides of the ANS, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And the parasympathetic is the calming side. The sympathetic is the energy and activation and getting amped up side. I don't like flight or fight. That was originally coined for a different purpose, and it got adopted to be used to describe the sympathetic nervous system. It just doesn't characterize it. We're always in a state back and forth between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Right now, I'm certainly very sympathetic dominant because I have to be on. I have to be thinking and talking. So I'm probably very little parasympathetic, and that's needed. I need to be more sympathetic activated right now. I'm not in a state of fight or flight, right? I won't get into that. I lost that battle. It's a losing battle to try to get people, it's like trying to correct people's grammar. They don't care. Nobody cares. But the sympathetic, it's the normal response that gives your body energy, releases adrenaline and other chemicals when you need to be on, not just when you need not just under extreme conditions, but just when you're exercising or need to do something like I'm doing now, really think clearly and intensely, engaging with other people and, or whatever you do, right? So the problem is that when that's not needed, when you're just trying to relax and, sitting on the couch and and your brain thinks that your body needs sympathetic support, so it's pumping out these chemicals that are amping it up, and you feel horrible, feel irritable, edgy, and so on. Well, the thing is that keeping the sympathetic down it takes energy from the brain, literal metabolic energy. So the brain is actively suppressing sympathetic all the time. It's the default state. So if your brain doesn't have resources to do that job, it pops up. That's why it pops up, not just with PCS, but with lots of things where people are living in an unhealthy way, where they become sympathetic dominant. And also depression and anxiety are default states as well. They're survival states. So the brain has to actively suppress anxiety and depression, right? So it takes energy. So if you have compromised resources, if you don't have, there's a pool of resources, literally metabolically speaking, that the brain has to do all the things that it does, including, all the sensory stuff you do, all the cognitive stuff you do, all the social planning that you do, and all that kind of stuff. And then it also has to take care of bodily systems with those resources, suppress pain, which is another default. All these horrible things are the default. It's a really weird design, but that's how it is. I think but it makes sense in terms of survival. When you have to survive, you don't. Anyway, so these are the things that pop up when you lower resources. So when you can give somebody back some of those resources by fixing something else that's wrong with the brain, you can actually fix ANS issues. So you can address them directly, but you can also address them indirectly by fixing up some of the other stuff that is going on, like, let's say, cognitively, some of the visual processing, balance, those things that seem unrelated. If you can clear those up, you free up more resources. And then the brain can use those to work on suppressing sympathetic overactivation. But like I said, you can also attack it directly. In fact, I call accelerated cool down, high intensity interval exercise is one ways it helps with that. Ice plunges really does help with that, but wears off after a while. And in fact, it can turn on you. Once you get used to it, your body accommodates, and you can actually engage more sympathetic after an ice bath. But it will work for a few months for most people. And that's a nice little break. But for a lot of people, like I said, it turns on you. But that's just one. There are many other devices and approaches and all kinds of things we're exploring. The biggest one, though, is cardiovascular exercise.
Okay.
Especially when you hit kind of a high level where you hit what we call the anaerobic crisis, or your anaerobic threshold, meaning that you want to stop. When you're working out so hard that you just have to stop, you're done. That's when good stuff happens. But I can explain more about that.
Yeah, let's jump into that. I'd love to hear more about the interval training that you've developed. Okay. How is it different than other?
Yeah. So, like I said, one of the things is that when you hit the most, that your peak working, you're running up a hill as fast as you can, or you're on a stationary bike going as fast as you possibly can, and then you just have to stop. Some really good stuff happens to your body and your brain when you do that. And like I said, those neurotrophins come out before, but other good re-regulation stuff happens. Your body's basically preparing to have that happen again. It happened once, maybe it's going to happen again. It's going to make the body stronger and the brain stronger to be able to handle that. So, it's kind of a reaction to hitting that extreme wall. But you can't sustain that for very long. And so that's why people developed high intensity intervals, so that you could do that for a little while and then do something easier. So you go typical interval, you go all out for whatever it is, a minute, or you can use measurements on your body to tell it, or whatever, hit goals. Anyway, you go through cycles. Then once you do a fast burst, then you jog for a little bit, then you do a fast burst and then jog. The crazy thing that I developed into this is that you just stop and you actually lie down, or you immediately stop. You just try to recover as quickly as you can by the position of your body, by lying down, by the way you're breathing. by meditating. You just want to cool down super fast. And, exercise science people or trainers would say, that's so bad, you'll build up lactic acid in your muscles. So what? You can massage those out or walk. That's not the end of the world. It's like they act like you're going to die if you just stop, but you're certainly not. That's what your body wants to do anyway. So just go with it, Okay, so why do that? All right, so there are a couple of things. Now we're talking about ANS regulation. We're talking about how do we get the parasympathetic stronger? Because the parasympathetic is that thing that suppresses the sympathetic. That's the energy that goes in to do it, right? So if you ever notice that when you start to work out and you're really going hard, you feel at your absolute worst at the beginning, right? So you start a run, if you're a runner, and you want to stop there, and that if you work through that, yeah, you might hit some other points where you're going faster up a hill and it's harder, but nothing's as worse as that first bit, that hump you get over with. And the reason why is because your parasympathetic system is still engaged and it's fighting against it, saying, are you sure you want to do this? Let's just turn around and sit down and chill. Like, are we really going to do this? And then it has to give up. So it gets pushed to a point where it has to give up. So it's being suppressed. What happens when it gets suppressed, it's pushing back and it's getting stronger, but it loses eventually. Sympathetic comes in because you need it. And then you feel better. See, sympathetic's making you feel better at this point. People gotta remember that it's beneficial to you when you need it. In this case, the parasympathetic's making you feel bad. Okay, so it goes away, but it's been pushed out of the way, so that helps make it stronger. But that only happens once during that exercise routine. So what we want to do is have that happen again. Okay, so now let's look at the other side of the interval. So you come off of that intense part, you're resting, and your body, it's hard, you're dying, you're gasping for air, and then you start to feel better because these good chemicals are coming in while you're getting oxygen. You're getting out the CO2 that's built up. That makes you not feel good. You are feeling better, and you're kind of tricking your body into thinking that it's done. Okay, so by lying down or sitting down or slow, and that's part of, I try to do that psychologically with patients, that pretend you're done. And then what happens then is if your brain says, okay, you're done, let's get the parasympathetic back in. If you're going to keep going, let's keep sympathetic, you'll need it. But if you're done, and so then the parasympathetic starts to engage again. And then you're like, tricked you, we're going at it again. So you get back on the bike or whatever, and you start going again. And it's not quite like the very first time, but it's the best we can get. You get that little battle going on between the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So those get multiple, as you do those, go through those cycles, 5, 6 times, however many you want to do. Each time you do that startup, you're re-engaging that battle between those two chains of the ANS. And that's what you want. They go to battle all day. They're used to fighting against one another. That's the healthy thing to do. And so that's, kind of you're relearning how to do that battle, but you're also giving the parasympathetic a leg up in that fight. And you're kind of tricking it into engaging. And so you don't get that with normal high interval exercise. You don't get that cool down. You're not fooling your body into thinking that you're done, like you do with what I call accelerated cool down hits. And at the clinic, we've named it neural cardio training, NCT, neural cardio training. I know that somebody was actually selling this protocol online, a former patient. Oh man, I should sell it. It's out there, we teach it to all our patients. So it can't be intellectually protected. I don't care. It is. Mm-hmm. It's just. But I would like a little bit of
credit for it.
I've got pride. I'm not above that. I like it. It was a lot of hard work to develop. It took a lot of intellectual time to figure that out. And it's one of those rare times when I come up with something really great.
It is really great. It's amazing. I talked to, and actually this is something I've been curious about. Most people, almost all of the patients that I talk to, it makes a really, really big difference for them. And even going home, they're like, I feel, as they're doing it post their epic treatment, they're like, this is, if I don't do it on a day, I feel it. Like when I do the intervals, it makes such a big difference.
It does two more things too. This special kind that I won't get into. They're kind of a little more esoteric. One of them is it re-regulates something called cerebral autoregulation, which goes awry in about 30 to, I don't know, more like 50% of people with PCS have cerebral dysautoregulation. And then a thing called cerebral vasoreactivity, which is kind of like heart rate variability, but for vessels. And it helps with those two things, that those both also go wrong in PCS, and they're a little boring to talk about. So, but just note that it's doing these four things. Three of them you can only get with this special kind of interval training. The one with the BDN, with the neurotrophins to prepare, you could get that out of a regular interval, but the others you don't.
So I am curious about, there have been a few patients that I've had where the intervals just seem to spike their symptoms, and it's really, really, really hard for them. What's going on there? Is what do you recommend?
So that's why it has to be done under careful supervision. We've got to monitor it, and you are going to have, it's going to backfire on you, because you're trying to re-regulate these things. And so you're going to exacerbate the things that you're trying to fix. But that's okay, because a lot of times the brain is learning from that. So I guess I will get into cerebral autoregulation. This is where a lot of the symptoms are coming from. So what this is that when your blood pressure goes up, the arteries that feed into your brain, the carotid artery and the basal arteries, they constrict a lot, because you have to keep the pressure from building up inside of your brain. It's called intracranial pressure. That builds up, you get nausea and headaches and so on, and other symptoms. And that is what exercise intolerance in PCS is. It's by and large that overperfusion of blood flow into the brain. It can also come from bad communication between your eyes and your head. The way, another thing we work on visually, that can happen because you're moving. As you're doing most exercises, your head moves and your eyes move. And if you lose that coordination, that's another source for those symptoms. But so you have those two. But anyway, how you fix cerebral dysautoregulation is by engaging it and having it fail. So it is improving as they do that, but it's kind of complicated. So if someone is at home doing this and that the symptoms keep flaring, I don't know that it would be good to keep. We'd want to see them. We'd want to see exactly what's going on, and exactly what the symptom is and what brings. And there's some things that we can do to keep that from happening. A lot of it has to do with the way they're breathing. Looking at their breathing. Another curious thing that happens is this thing called ventilatory threshold goes away in people with PCS. It's the thing that makes you hyperventilate when you're exercising. So you start exercising and you need to breathe faster. Some people don't. They're still breathing at their normal rate. And so that can be a simple thing of just say, breathe faster than you think you need to. Yeah. And so that can sometimes help. There are other tricks. So we need to look at them and need to do these tricks. But yes, it will absolutely spike symptoms. And then it's kind of not such a bad thing, because now, okay, we're getting something done. And it can reveal some issues, some details about their injury, the nature of those symptoms that flare up during it.
Okay, super interesting. Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh man, there's so much that I would love to just dive in more with you. This is so fascinating. But anything else about dysautonomia and how to help that you want to make sure we touch on?
Yeah, it's just that it's tricky, and that we end up throwing everything. We've got all our tricks at it and finding something that will work. It is a tricky one, and it's one that sometimes we don't get nailed down while they're at the clinic, but then we work with them after and get it. But like I said, there are so many tricks out there, devices that people have developed, and we're open to all of them. We try all kinds of things, and we're trying more things. But that, like I said, probably the doing exercise of this kind is one of the takes care of a lot of cases of it, but certainly not all of them.
And it is something that can be healed, recovered from.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It's not, it's not meant to be that way. And you have a healthy brain. Even if you don't have a very healthy brain, it still can be fixed, because just don't give up hope. It seems hopeless and it seems extreme, but just don't give up hope on fixing that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that actually, that concept of like not giving up hope that you mentioned earlier, and I want to tie this back in, just that's why, like when you were talking about how you want the word to get out there, that's exactly why I'm doing this too, because there have been so many patients who've come in so hopeless, and then with being with other people who understand what they're going through, whether that's the other patients or the people, the staff that is working there, the therapists, and the other people who just know what it's like people gain hope and they see differences in them. And it is a beautiful thing. And I'm, again, so grateful to be a part of it. One last question really quick here. And like I said, I have lots of other questions. I would love to just sit and pick your brain all day.
I'll come back.
That would be amazing. Can you tell us, so we've talked about the PAR cycle, the prepares, especially those intervals and cardio stuff. I kind of want to touch for a second on the recovery piece. And I know we use brain waves a lot, and I was hoping you could just explain to us why brain waves work and why we do it.
So, and to be clear, it's only one of the things that it's a good one. And so most people do that for their rest phase. Some people don't, it doesn't work or they don't like it, so we don't do it. But what it is actually is binaural beats. It's a little trick that's been around for a lot of years. It's kind of one of these groovy things people did to meditate, and they didn't know why it worked, but we know why it works. So what that is, and we do that during the rest phase. Because one reason is that if you use the right frequency, it can induce a meditative state. It can actually induce Zen meditation, which is an alpha wave. That's a brain wave that I don't have time to get into how waves work in the brain, how electrical waves work. They float as neurons fire, they sync up and they get into wave formations. When a wave gets really dominant, it spreads and keeps other neurons from firing and doing what they're supposed to. And that's actually a good thing, because sometimes you just need to shut it all down. So that's what you do when you meditate. You do Zen meditation. You induce a lot of alpha waves. Alpha waves are real bullies. They spread and they shut down the normal firing of neurons. And that's what you want to do. Like I say, it sounds scary, but you want to just stop thinking. That's what the goal is. And if you're not good at meditating, you can kind of force that to happen using binaural beats. So the trick is that you have the ears are isolated from one another, and you send in a signal, and it's got embedded in it a wave, a beat, basically, that's going at what's in this alpha frequency, which is 8 to 12 hertz, 8 to 10 times a second. Well, what happens is that you have two sounds coming in at a frequency that are offset by that amount, offset by 8 to 12 beats, right? So what happens is that's confusing to your brain to get these two signals coming in, because normally in your environment, your ears aren't isolated from one another. So both ears are hearing the same thing that's out there. So your brain assumes it's the same thing, but we're tricking it because we're putting in two different frequencies.
So in each ear.
Offset. Yeah, one might be, 206 hertz, and the other one might be 216 hertz, So it's about like the 10 or so right in the alpha range off. Okay. So the brain tries to correct that because it doesn't like what's going on. And so it tries to make it be what it's expecting. And the brain does that a lot. Your brain tries to make what it's experiencing be what it's expecting. So in this case, it does that. So it's trying to, so then it's got this regulation that happens in the thalamus, deep part of your brain, that adjusting one or the other of the ears to make those match. And it's putting that work in, adjusting it at that 8 hertz, keeps adjusting, just putting that work, that starts producing an 8 hertz wave because it's putting so much effort into doing it that starts engaging all these neurons at 8 hertz. So then it spreads, and a lot of people get that alpha meditation benefit out of doing that. Or if you lower it down to a more sleepy one, people, put them to sleep. It can be effective for some people. A lot of people love it. And so we always have it there because it's the first time that they've experienced it and they really like it. And they go home and they download an app that they can do it with. And it's one of those things that people discover sometimes at the clinic. Some people don't like it. Some people are neutral to it. And some people are like, this is the greatest thing ever. I can't believe I didn't know about it,
Yeah. And I think it can be very helpful and beneficial for people. It's kind of like to tell people it's like a condensed rest period. Like it helps bring things down more quickly.
I first gave it to Tom Brady. He put on his phone and then he played it in his car over his car stereo. And he's like, man, that didn't work at all. That was stupid. Right? You can't do it over your car stereo.
Yes, that's a note for everyone. I don't think a lot of people don't realize that you have to have headphones. Yeah. It doesn't work otherwise. Awesome. Well, this has been so informative. I've learned a ton as I was expecting to, and I'm very grateful. So thank you so much. Is there anything, any last words of wisdom or messages you want to share with anybody?
No, just have hope. Just things will change. It could take time, but and it seems hopeless. I mean, that sounds really pithy. It sounds really tried to say it, but it's hard to say that in a way that really has, that because everybody says have hope. I don't know how to say it in a better way than that, but just that, this is if you're suffering from PCS or the aftermath of a viral infection or carbon monoxide poisoning or chemobrain or anything where you're getting brain scans that tell you that you're normal, you're getting doctors telling you you're normal, you're getting family and friends saying, come on, you're just, you're nothing wrong with you. You've got a healthy brain. And even if there is a little bit of damage, it doesn't matter. Brain can be damaged quite a bit and still function really well. It can be damaged a lot and still function really well. So just, don't listen to those voices. You've got all these healthy brain cells there that are ready to work in a way that makes you feel good and not feel strange and yucky all the time.
Yep. I love that. And I love that why. It's not just like, hey, this is good news. It actually, there's science behind it.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.